This morning, we're going to discuss the New Jersey Innovation Evergreen Fund, the tax credit auction. It's one of two sessions. We're having a session this afternoon as well. And you can find all of that information on the NJEDA website under Economic Recovery Act. The New Jersey Innovation Evergreen Fund is part of the New Jersey Economic Recovery Act, which was signed in January of 2021. The ERA creates a package of tax incentive, financing, and grant programs that will build a stronger, fairer New Jersey economy. It is both a broad-based recovery bill and a reform bill that will better position New Jersey to recover from economic crisis caused by the COVID-19 pandemic while remaining true to the NJEDA's commitments to transparency and accountability. You can find out everything you need to know about the Economic Recovery Act on our website, njeda.com/Economic Recovery Act. Next slide, please. Pursuant to Governor Murphy's Executive Order number 63, we're providing opportunities for groups and stakeholders to engage with us, the NJEDA, in crafting the rules and definitions surrounding the New Jersey Innovation Evergreen Fund. We welcome your constructive input on how to ensure new programs created through the ERA are structured and administered in a manner that drives opportunities for all residents and all communities. We're going to begin the session with a presentation that will summarize the information. The opportunity for feedback will follow and be available after the presentation. The entirety of this presentation is expected to take approximately 90 minutes. It could be less, it could be more, depending on how much feedback we get from you all. Next slide, please. Members of the public are encouraged to submit written feedback on the New Jersey Innovation Evergreen Fund via the NJEDA website, njeda.com/program-specific-feedback through January 14th. Both the New Jersey Innovation Evergreen Fund public feedback sessions will be recorded and posted on the same website, njeda.com/program-specific-feedback. So if you weren't able to attend one or the other, or you know someone who couldn't, you can direct them there. Feedback can be submitted, as I said, verbally at the end of the presentation, and the way that you'll do that is by using the raise hand function that's included in Zoom. What will happen is we'll call on you, we'll state your name, we'll ask you to unmute yourself, and then once you're unmuted, if you could provide your name, where you're calling from, and then provide your feedback. We're going to acknowledge everybody in order, and Zoom is wonderful, and as you raise your hand, it will just start a queue. And we like to keep comments brief. The slide in front of you says we're limiting speakers to a maximum of 3 minutes. We're not going to limit you specifically to that 3 minutes today, because we really want to get your input, but we do ask for you to be concise in your comments in order to provide everybody the opportunity to provide feedback. One opportunity to provide remarks. If we have time at the end and you have more to say, if you've already spoken, you can raise your hand again. And if we have time at the end, you'll have gone to the bottom of the queue, and we'll move up that line, and we'll call on you again. We don't anticipate a heavy dialogue. We're here to clarify some basic questions. We're not speaking project specific and in the minutia of detail. So we can provide some broad clarifying information and certainly engage with you on your comments, but our main goal is to hear from you and to record what you have to say. And then again, everyone should remember that this is a public forum, so be polite, be respectful, as everybody typically is, and it should be a wonderful opportunity for us to engage with all of you that have joined us today, and it looks like it's a pretty robust group. At this time, I'm going to turn the microphone over to our Chief Executive Officer, Tim Sullivan, to provide some opening remarks.
Hey everybody, good morning. Tim Sullivan here. Thanks, Patience, for that introduction and for everything you do. I'll be brief because we got a lot of good content to get through. We've been talking about, as we go back to the governor's, so Governor Murphy on October 1st of 2018, which is getting to be a few years ago now, unveiled his economic development master plan. And I think one of the most exciting things that was contained in that plan was a proposal for what ended up being the Innovation Evergreen Fund that we're here to talk about today. It is a game changer for the New Jersey innovation economy, talking about bringing together big companies in our startup ecosystem with sort of higher ed in between, and sort of all nestled together, or nested together is a better way to put it, in thinking about how we can help create a more robust pipeline and ecosystem of the next generation of great New Jersey companies. Because New Jersey's privileged to be and thrilled to be home of a great roster of big companies, Fortune 500, Fortune 1000, large scale, big employer companies. And that's great. We love that. We want more of that. We're all for it. What we haven't seen is enough new, young New Jersey companies growing and scaling to that size. We want and need to have more early stage companies that put down roots in New Jersey, are founded in New Jersey, stay in New Jersey, grow in New Jersey. And to do that, we think venture capital and supportive early stage capital is a really important part of the equation. It's not the only part of the equation, and Kathleen and Tim and others who will follow me in a moment, won't talk about it in detail this morning, but we've got a really robust roster of programs that are designed to catalyze and support early stage companies. But venture capital and early stage growth capital in particular is a sort of a vital component of any successful ecosystem. And we think, and Governor Murphy thinks, and our entire team thinks, that this Innovation Evergreen Fund is an extraordinary opportunity to really supercharge the nature and volume of early stage capital that's available in our startup ecosystem. And so we're thrilled to be able to be here telling you about how we're thinking about approaching this. These listening sessions. We're sort of breaking this into two pieces. One focused kind of on the auction, and then later today focused on the kind of the investment side of the equation. These have been really valuable throughout a lot of the ERA programs. Patience mentioned the Economic Recovery Act, which is coming up on its 1-year birthday tomorrow. We've had a number of these sessions where we've gotten really great feedback on Emerge and Aspire and the Historic Tax Credit Program and a number of other programs where, we put our best foot forward in terms of drafting how we're thinking about these programs, but this is not, the final answer, and this is an opportunity to kind of shape and mold these programs. So our ideas, we think, are pretty darn good, but they'll only get better with input and feedback from this group and from the group later today, and from public feedback that we'll take over the next couple of months. But this program is an extraordinary opportunity to really change the character in a good way of New Jersey's economy, and think about having a much more robust and vibrant and resilient early stage ecosystem. And so with that, I'm eager to hand it over to Kathleen, from whom this idea really emanated back nearly 4 years ago now, in thinking about how we could follow Governor Murphy's directive to go big with regard to venture capital, and how we could supercharge the ecosystem here. So without further ado, Kathleen Coviello, over to you.
Thanks, Tim. Good morning, everyone. Pleasure to be here. Again, my name is Kathleen Coviello. I'm an Executive Vice President with the Economic Development Authority, and thrilled to spend some time with everyone this morning talking about the New Jersey Innovation Evergreen Fund. It's like nothing we've had before in the state, and something that we're really excited about. The legislation that created this program puts a footprint together by which we'll follow, but there's a lot of pieces between the lines that we need to fill in through what's called the rules writing process, and we welcome really the feedback from everyone this morning on that. I'm going to take you through high level what the New Jersey Innovation Evergreen Fund is, why it was created, and just some macro level input on how and why it works, we believe. And then I'm going to turn it over to my colleague, Tim Rollander, who's the director of our venture programs, to get in the weeds a little bit more. And as you've heard from Patience and Tim Sullivan, this is one of two sessions. The weeds section of this presentation will focus more on the tax credit auction, and this afternoon session will focus more on the venture fund piece, both the approval of venture managers and the actual investments. So before you, you see a slide that really recaps why we think this is so important. As Tim Sullivan mentioned, we believe the venture capital industry is a very important tool in driving innovation in the state. We know risk capital is paramount to an entrepreneur starting a business and being successful in growing that business. And what we've seen happen in New Jersey is that there's been a drop in venture capital dollars invested in the state of New Jersey. Now, we've seen a slight uptick in the last 4 years, but not to the volume that we know we need to get to in order to achieve our goals around driving innovation and job creation in the state of New Jersey. So when you look at New Jersey against some of our peer states, we were doing not too bad in 2007, and you can see the slide in 2020 down to number 17 from number 8 in rankings of venture capital investment. This data comes from PitchBook. On an annual basis, we don't have the 2021 data yet, but we will certainly share that as soon as available. But number 17 isn't where we want to be. It puts us in states that we don't believe are really our peer states. And we want to be, playing with folks that you see on the slide because we believe we have the talent and the resources to build great companies, and we need the dollars to match to invest in them. And so we think this is an important piece and component of the Evergreen program, that we have a robust landscape for investment dollars. If we didn't have other tools, if we didn't have great universities, we'd be talking about a different approach here. But when we look at the historical investment in the most recent full year of 2020, we see that the valuations for New Jersey aren't too far off the mark, although a little bit more attractive than our folks on the West Coast or in Boston. So a $10 million valuation compares to these states, but certainly on the modest to low end. The dollars of funding, as you can see, are significantly below our peers, and that's what we saw on the previous slide. But what we think is really compelling is the exit valuation. So if you look at the multiple of exits versus investments in New Jersey businesses, what you see is that we're top of class. So perhaps our valuations are good, but what I think it really tells you is that when these companies are being sold and exited, is that we are really performing very, very well. So as most venture capitalists are capitalists for a reason, and they're looking for strong returns, we think this makes a very strong value proposition on why investors should invest more money in New Jersey. And what's interesting when you look at the stats about investment that does happen in New Jersey, and again, we're taking the data point of 2020, there was 219 investors that invested that $1.2 billion in the year, and only 6 of them were from New Jersey. So we see a robust outbound interest looking at investment opportunities in the state because we don't have enough VC capital here. And it's quite interesting to see that it comes across 30 different countries, or comes from 30 different countries and 35 different states. So we want to find a way, and we think this is one of the important tools to do that, to catalyze those investors that are coming in and making 1 or 2 investments in the state to spend more time here and to make more investments here. And also the opportunity to grow new investment firms within the state of New Jersey. And when you look at our roster of successes, and I think sometimes we don't do a good job in celebrating some of these, they're big names that have really made a difference in everyone's life today. And so for folks that say there's no good deals in New Jersey, I often reference this list and say, I think there are good deals in New Jersey. And as we saw in the previous slide, they can have great returns for investors too. So many of these are household names that folks are familiar with, from Jet.com that started and grew and was sold ultimately to Walmart, or Audible that sold and grew to Amazon. And what I think is interesting, and Celgene, of course, on the life science side deserves mentioning, what's really interesting is the jobs that were created and grown in these companies. And for the most part, these jobs stay in New Jersey. They're very sticky jobs. And many of the folks that work in the ranks of these companies go on to create their own successful businesses once these companies are exited and sold. And that's really the ecosystem and goal that we're trying to build here. So why the New Jersey Innovation Evergreen Fund, and why the structure that it is? And you know, we've talked a little bit about this in the slides to date, but what we think is one of the really unique aspects of it is it brings together all the key parties to build an innovation ecosystem in the state. So it brings together the large corporations, as you'll hear, as a source of funding and a source of engagement and mentoring for the young companies, and an opportunity to look at deal flow in New Jersey. It brings together the venture capital community and the entrepreneurial community. And as I've mentioned, increases the resources to do that. By now, you know, we've seen the stats on the trends, and we want to turn those stats around and again, kind of shout from a bully pulpit and say, listen, there's great opportunity here in New Jersey. We want to work with the great companies that we already have in the state and build more companies in the state. And it's this unique tool to provide connections. And we believe they really need to be curated connections, particularly in today's day and age. And there needs to be engagement between the large companies, the small companies will get the funding. And ultimately, we hope to have a physical place in the center of the state in New Brunswick with the hub that is being built as one of the key initiatives from the governor around innovation. Groundbreaking happened just a few months ago, but that space will include physical space that allows folks to come together. So there'll be an auditorium. It's right on a rail line connecting Boston, New York, Philadelphia, and Delaware, and Washington, D.C., which we think is important to get people easily accessible to one location. There'll be co-working space there. Our key higher ed institutions are part of that project as well. So again, curated, bringing folks together, we think is part of what we've been missing as the magic sauce or magic glue to pull all this together in the state. So as we mentioned, there's three key components to the Evergreen Fund. The first is raising the capital that we'll deploy through investments. We're going to dig a little bit deeper on that this morning. The second piece is qualifying venture funds, and the third is the investments. The investments will happen via the qualified venture funds, and we'll go through a little bit high level on that this morning, but again, this afternoon session, we'll talk to it in more detail. Next slide. So to start talking high level on the bidding process, which is the topic for this morning, and how we will raise the funds. The authority will run a competitive bid process. The bids will be on tax credits and a strategic commitment. So the bids will have a minimum floor price, a minimum bidding amount of $500,000 and priced at 75 cents on the dollar. So that's through the legislation. They will be run annually or as soon as we hit a floor of $15 million of available resources in the fund. Bidders who choose to bid will be able to provide a best and final offer. So if we find that, you know, there's some very, very strong bids, others have weak bids, we'll go back to the weaker bidders and say, would you like to up your bid for consideration? And they will be prorated based on some scoring that we're going to go through in a bit this morning. So we've heard a lot of questions to date from folks. What does that strategic commitment mean? So, you know, I understand I can bid between 75 cents and any number on how much I want to pay for these tax credits. But how do I determine what my strategic bid should be? So we've developed some examples, and you'll see a footnote on here relative to where to find those on our website. But they fall into four primary categories, as you can see here: people, ecosystem, investment, and marketing. So investing in people, what does that mean? And we've just put up an example here. But you can offer, if you are ABC Corporation in the state of New Jersey, you want to be part of this exciting project, You can offer your employees as mentors or advisors for startups. We hear that all the time from entrepreneurs in the community. You know, I'm in the cell and gene space. Where do or how do I get connected with somebody at one of the great pharma companies in New Jersey? You know, I need a mentor. I need an ear from somebody who can help as a sounding board. So this will be a curated mechanism to allow that to happen, and will add value for the entrepreneur, and certainly we hope financial value for the corporation who's buying the corporate tax credits. Investment is an easy one. You can run pilots in a certain area. So again, that's something we hear all the time from the entrepreneurial community. You know, I have a minimum viable product. I need to test it with somebody. You know, I want to work with one of the corporations in the state. So creating case trials and investing in companies, entrepreneurial companies in the state can help increase your visibility into what's happening in the innovation economy, and hopefully can add value for that young company as well. Marketing is certainly a great one. We know that there's so much going on in the state, but getting that messaging out is just difficult. So we want the folks that work with us on the Innovation Fund to become our partners in marketing all the great things that they're doing, all the collaboration that they have with partners in New Jersey, all the work that they're doing with our universities. I think once you scratch the surface, you start to learn there's a pretty robust ecosystem here, but it's just hard to understand what all is going on. And then, as I mentioned, ecosystem and space, certainly that could be a category as well. We need a way to quantify the strategic commitment. So you'll hear a little bit from Tim Rollander on that this morning. So we're going to ask for very specific responses on this. So you're going to offer X number of mentoring hours valued at XYZ, and how you came up with that XYZ, because that's going to contribute to your ranking and score that will result in how much corporate tax credits you're available to purchase. So we've talked a little bit about this, but a nice summary for our folks that are considering participating in the corporate tax auction. What's in it for you, right? Most of these companies are public companies. They have shareholders that they have to respond to. And so we think this is a pretty strong list and a lever to help you make that why we should do this question answered. So financial, you get up to a 25%, 25 cents on the dollar discount on buying tax credits. There may be a tax deduction for what you're doing. Again, we encourage you to speak with your accountants, but you know, you're offering internships, employee mentorship hours. There may be financial benefits with that as well. Market awareness and branding, we believe, is really, really strong here, right? So we are going to be spending a lot of time in our state talking about the great partners that are part of this. As you'll hear through the later slides, the curation and engagement opportunity and the access that comes with that, we think is key. So it gets you a seat at the table. It gets you to understand what's happening in these companies that are getting funded in New Jersey, and there will be actual networking and curated events to help connect you with the companies that are getting funding in the state through the Evergreen Fund. So how are we going to invest in companies? And we talked a little bit about this already. The qualified venture firms will identify the companies. They will set the terms of the deal. We at the authority will look to make sure that it meets the general criteria set out by the legislation for the Evergreen Fund. It has to be in one of the targeted industries that you see here on your slide. And as I mentioned, we'll match on a one-to-one basis up to $5 million, with some bonuses for diverse entrepreneurs that receive investment, as you see on the bottom of the slide here. The benefit to the startups, we think, is pretty self-evident, right? They're going to get an increased availability of funding. They're going to know who's interested in investing in New Jersey companies. They will get that engagement with the corporations based on their strategic bid. And certainly an opportunity to double down investment dollars from New Jersey and become part of this ecosystem. So how does this all work? We will open up a bid auction application for our corporations that want to participate in this. As I mentioned, there will be two parts to the application. It will include both a financial bid and a strategic bid. It will be open for 3 weeks. We will be asking when folks submit their bid to put a deposit down. It's a 10% refundable deposit, and there is a cap. I believe it's $500,000, the cap on the 10% bid. But Tim, when you speak, feel free to correct me on that, Tim Rollander. We will go back to the bidders and say, let them know if they've missed anything. And as I previously mentioned, we'll also give them an opportunity to up with their best and final offer if we find that there's a real askew in the bids that we receive. The final bids will be approved by the board at the Economic Development Authority, and then a contract will be executed between the corporation and the authority. So that strategic commitment, when the corporation is bidding on it, will be really important because it's going to be embedded in a formal contract that goes with that tax credit. And then once that is issued, you'll engage with us. You'll be part of the Evergreen Advisory Board if you're successful in your bid. And there will be annual just compliance monitoring to make sure that you executed and did what you said you were going to do on the strategic bid. We would hate to see somebody say, you know, they're going to build a 60,000 square foot incubator that elevates them to the rankings on the bid, and then it doesn't come to fruition. So we ask everybody to keep that in mind. You know, you're going to be held accountable for delivering on what your strategic bid is as well. Next slide, if you would, please. So I am going to take this opportunity and turn the deck over to Tim Rollander. Tim Rollander is the director of our venture programs here at the Authority. And as we previously mentioned, Tim is going to go through really what's in the legislation, which is the playbook that we must follow, and where we're recommending filling in between the lines for further clarification. And he'll talk to you about how that's all going to work. So Tim, over to you.
Good morning. Thank you, Kathleen. Thank you all for your attendance today. My name is Tim Rollander. I'm the Director of Venture Programs here at the EDA. In the next 15 slides, we'll provide information on the program attributes. We're excited to gather your feedback and insight to make this program, and in particular, this session this morning, the tax credit auction portion, a success. So with that, I will dive in. And as Kathleen mentioned, just back on that one last slide, Caitlin, in order to help orient you for the next section, we would like to signal items in white throughout this portion of the deck are provided to us in law, while text or specific portions of text in green are proposals by EDA to add clarity to the legislation. Following the conclusion of the walkthrough, we'll show a series of prompts where we would like to, which we'd like to use to help guide feedback towards certain specific topics relating to these points. So with that, then let's dive in. So next slide, Caitlin, please. Thank you. So slide 22. To be awarded a tax credit under the program, a potential purchaser shall submit a bid application that will specify the requested amount of tax credits, which shall not be less than $500,000. Specify the percentage amount the potential purchaser will pay in exchange for the requested amount of tax credits, which shall not be less than 75% of the requested dollar amount of tax credits, and commit to serve on the New Jersey Innovation Evergreen Advisory Board for 1 year from time of approval. This section is provided in legislation with the 1-year clarifier posed, which is why that's section 3. And specify the number, description, duration, and financial cost to the potential purchaser to provide mentorship, networking, and collaboration opportunities to qualified businesses that receive funding under this program. Again, this is a section which seeks to align legislation with the practical process we intend to implement. Again, the Evergreen Advisory Board participation is mandatory for all tax credit awardees for 1 year from the time of tax credit approval. We are proposing compulsory quarterly advisory board meetings that entail participants, for example, present learnings from their strategic commitment, sharing feedback for the next auction, offering guidance on programmatic initiatives to support the innovation economy, and so on. Board members also need to engage in at least 2 networking and ecosystem building events in the state. For example, NJ Founders and Funders, an investor entrepreneur speed dating event hosted by the NJEDA. speaking at an innovation festival, or judging a pitch competition. Non-compliance with board requirements can lead to a 1-year debarment from future auction participation. Do you want to signal that? So thanks, Caitlin. Next slide. Moving through the next 2 slides, we will discuss award sizes and initial bidding outcomes. On 25, up to $60 million of tax credits will be available annually for your financial and strategic commitments. Tax credits are valid for the year in which the bid application closes and for the next 7 privilege periods. The authority may prorate the amount of tax credits allocated to each tax credit purchaser if the amount of tax credits requested for purchase exceeds the total amount available for purchase. In this section, we clarify the prorated award size is based on the requested allocation and valuation of bids. At bid application, bidders are offered the possibility to increase requested allocation if any of the $60 million pool remains unallocated. If indicated, those specific bidders will be contacted, starting with the highest scores first, to purchase the remainder of tax credits without having to re-up their strategic commitment. 26. To elaborate on the proration mechanism, addressing the opposite scenario that I just described, if more than $60 million of eligible bids are received, bids will be prorated based upon a formula determined by the authority. All bids will be ranked such that bidders with higher scores will receive a greater proportion of their requested amount of tax credits. A percentile rank is calculated to determine how the bidders compare to each other. All qualified applicants receive a prorated amount of tax credits based on their percentile rank. This mechanism ensures that the tax credit auction is transparent and efficient, with priority given to higher scoring bids. In the example on the right, there are $75 million of requests, but only $60 million of tax credits available. As per the proposed proration model, bidder A will receive $25 million, while bidder C will receive between $10 and $15 million of their ask, depending on the number of participants and specific proration scenario. In no case will a bidder's allocation be reduced below $500,000. The auction application will consist of common application questionnaires, including information like contact info, bank details, and the legal questionnaire. Evergreen specific information will require for the financial bid, price, number of credits requested, and for the strategic commitment, applicant self-valuation, details for the offering, duration of commitment, benefits to the innovation ecosystem, names of affiliated employees and partner organizations, and so forth. As Kathleen mentioned before, we want to get a specific indication of what we should expect. Both the financial and strategic bid work together toward the final score and ranking. The presentation posted on the website includes 2 appendix slides that illustrate how scoring may work. Again, please note this has not been finalized at this point. Additional supporting documentation will include, but is not limited to, New Jersey business registration, New Jersey tax clearance certificate, and to verify the strategic commitment breakup, including proof of self-valuation using documents such as lease agreements, payroll of executives, invoice of estimated event costs, and other information relevant to verify self-valuation. We'll also seek the name of the company's Evergreen Advisory Board representative. The completed bid application will include a refundable deposit equivalent to 10% of your entire financial bid, up to $500,000. Following initial submission of the bids, EDA staff will evaluate and rank bids prior to communicating the bids back to the bidders in an anonymized fashion, taking proration into consideration. So participants have 1 week to refine or increase their bids. Bids may not be withdrawn or adjusted down. Strategic commitments are not simultaneously prorated. So even if the financial bid is decreased through the proration scenario, the bidder will still be responsible for the entirety of the strategic commitment. Bids are binding in case a corporate bidder doesn't follow through on their wire transfer post-approval. The credits can be reassigned by the authority to the next highest scoring bidder without need of re-auction. As penalty for rescinding on a bid, the corporate bidder will be ineligible to bid in the future. Board approval leads to contractual document execution. Funds will be transferred within 30 days of execution. Compliance is required according to executed purchase agreement. The strategic bids will vary from participant to participant. These commitments will be clearly delineated and verifiable in the contracts. That said, all participants must adhere to the Evergreen Advisory Board commitment. Moving past slide 30 to slide 31, additional information presented here is focused on long-term program compliance. There's a completeness check, legal verification, and ongoing compliance associated with every bid. The qualified purchaser must achieve at least 80% of a strategic commitment component. In the event this is not achieved, the qualified purchaser is allowed 1 year to cure the shortfall. Failure to cure the shortfall will result in the qualified purchaser paying the value of the unmet strategic commitment component up to the amount of the tax credit discount received. The strategic commitment enables a company to participate in the discounted purchase of tax credits. Their non-compliance has detracted from the ecosystem in which another company may have provided benefit. Second, the failed bidders compensating the state for the lapse in their bid and paying for the strategic commitment an alternative qualifying bidder might have provided. To prevent undue financial advantage, a corporation that bids and receives tax credits through Evergreen is not able to receive any investment through the program that year, even to an affiliated entity, for example, an investment arm, a venture arm of a corporation. The restriction is removed after the year of tax credit bid application and allocation. Next, Caitlin. On slide 32, as a final point, we note there is a program deposit. A deposit for 10% of the tax credit bid up to $500,000 will be required at time of bid application. This amount is refundable and will be counted towards the amount paid for the tax credits, assuming a successful bid is submitted. In case of proration, if the final offer is below 10% of the initial ask, a refund for the amount in excess of the tax credit purchase will be returned to the bidder. And then finally on 34, that brings us to our feedback question. So at this point, before we open the public feedback portion, we would like to take the opportunity to signal specific feedback questions, which we recognize may have a material impact on the function and usability of the program. To the extent you might have any specific feedback on the following or overall, of course, it would be much appreciated. Regarding the financial bids to help maximize uptake of credits, can you offer insight on how your corporation would evaluate the amount of pricing of credits? Would timing the auction matter relative to your fiscal year end, for example, Q3, Q4, towards the latter part of the calendar year? If there were an excess of tax credits, is it likely that you would request extra credits as it regards the strategic commitment? How might the strategic commitment impact your decision to apply and your bid? Thinking back to examples Kathleen noted, if you had a chance to review and any of other examples linked on the information page, what types of strategic commitments are most compelling to you? Investments, marketing, people, so forth. How do you already contribute some of these ways in the state of New Jersey? And how do you quantify your contributions? Regarding the process, what functional unit or personnel at your company should be involved in this process? If you are affiliated with a venture firm or have a venture arm, is it more likely that you bid on tax credits or become a qualified venture firm each year? Would 10% of the tax credit bid up to $500,000 as a refundable deposit deter your company from program participation? And relative to the Evergreen Advisory Board, how do you anticipate being able to add value to the advisory board? What other engagement would you like to see for tax credit bidders, awardees? So with that, I'll pause and defer to patience so we can review the instructions and open for feedback. Thank you.
Quickly, we'll go through the manner to provide your public comment, which is really easy. Just raise your hand in the Zoom function at the bottom of your screen. That'll put you into the queue in order. Once you're done, we'll lower your hand for you. A couple of things based on some questions and some things that have come up in the chat. If you are speaking in support of another's comment, please give that person's name and let us know that whatever their public comment was, you're in agreement. And that way that's recorded on your behalf. And there's not a need to reiterate word for word what someone else has said, if that's why you're commenting. And we've got two folks with their hands raised. I'm thinking there's going to be a lot more. So back to those specific feedback questions. And I'm going to start with Greg Olson. Mr. Olson, I'm going to click that you're allowed to talk. You should be able to unmute yourself now. We do ask that you introduce yourself, let us know where you're calling from, as well as your name. And welcome to our listening session. Thanks.
Thanks very much. I'm Greg Olson. I live in Montgomery Township, and I have an office in Princeton. I've been an entrepreneur for about 35 years, and now I'm a venture capital investor. I was raised in New Jersey. I've lived here for 50 years. I love it. You know, you get what you pay for, is what I say about taxes. Listen, I've benefited greatly from the EDA over the last 35 years. And thank you very much. I've worked with Kathleen and Tim. They're great to work with. I just love the EDA. I have a simple question. I'm having trouble digesting this. If I were willing to invest, let's say $1 million into a New Jersey qualified startup, what benefits do I get?
Good morning, Greg. How are you? It's good to hear from you. We'll cover the investment portion of the program later on this afternoon. That'll be at 2 o'clock. So if you're available at that point, we'd love for you to come back and dial in.
Oh, I will.
Okay, great. Kathleen covered a slide earlier on that spoke a little bit to benefits for startups in the state. So if you can, Caitlin, flip back to that.
Or Tim, I'm happy to jump
yeah, please,
in.
Jump in, please.
Yeah, so even while you're looking for that slide. So Greg, the way that it will work is if you become a qualified manager, we talked a little bit about that criteria and we'll dig into it more this afternoon. You would be eligible to manage $1 million matching into a company from the Evergreen Fund. So the qualified managers pick the deal. They're able to draw down from this Evergreen Fund and manage it on behalf of the fund on a one-to-one matching basis under the same terms that you set for your investment.
All right, but I could choose the firm.
You choose the terms. Yes, the qualified manager set the deal terms.
And the startup company.
And you choose the startup company. Yep, there is a qualification that we'll run through this afternoon on the startup companies, relative to New Jersey employment. But as long as it meets those criteria and it's in one of these targeted industries, then it's good.
Okay. Thank you.
Thank you.
Yep.
Okay, next on our list of hands, and still only 2, but I know there are more coming, is Thomas Bracken. Mr. Bracken, you should be able to unmute yourself. Please introduce yourselves. Let us know where you're coming from. For those of anyone who on this that doesn't know where you're calling from, and we're excited to hear your feedback.
Thank you, Patience. Tom Bracken, I am the president of the New Jersey State Chamber of Commerce, and mine is more of a comment on how to make this program even more successful. Obviously, the driver of getting dollars in play here is reduced tax burdens for companies because they are getting tax credits for their investments. The one thing that this state is missing that would help dramatically in startups and venture opportunities is capital gains treatment on exit strategies of companies. Obviously, we do not have capital gains treatment that I know of for companies being sold in New Jersey that are part of venture funds. Many other states do. And the same concept of having a lower tax burden for companies putting money into this applies to companies being sold out of this, because the lower the tax burden, the more money they make, and that's a driver. So I would highly encourage something that we've been beating the drum about for 10 years, which is trying to get legislation passed to provide capital gains treatment, which means lower taxes on the sale of these venture companies.
Thanks,
Tom,
Tom.
thank you. I think that's a really interesting concept. Certainly something that, as you know, requires legislation and tax law, but could be an interesting complement to what the Evergreen legislation already has in it.
And the same concept, Kathleen, that applies with EDA programs, which is the economic benefit portion for giving incentives to companies. People would say, yeah, but you're lowering the revenue of New Jersey by lowering the tax rate. Well, you could determine that the state is much better off from an economic benefit standpoint, even with lower taxes coming in, because of the opportunities provided and the growth of these companies while they're in New Jersey and the jobs created, et cetera. So the same concept about economic benefit that applies to other EDA programs could be applied to mitigate the argument against lowering the tax revenues.
Yeah, and certainly on that early slide in the deck around success stories, right? We have real live examples of that, right?
Yes.
all the impact that Celgene has had, and the jobs created as they grew from nothing to now part of BMS in the state. Same for Audible and their impact on Newark and the larger state. So we have real examples and success stories to point to on that.
Thanks so much for your comments. Next in line, we have Erin Price. Erin, I've unmuted you on my end. If you'll unmute yourself, introduce yourself, and let us know, let everyone know where you're calling from. We'd love to hear your comments.
First, I want to make sure patients, you can hear me.
We can.
Great. This is Erin Price. I'm the CEO of Tech United New Jersey. We're a trade group focused on the entrepreneurial innovation community in New Jersey. It's nice to be with many of you today, familiar faces and voices. First, I would echo Tom's comment, though I think it's unrelated to the Evergreen Innovation Fund. We published an article a few weeks ago about that exact issue and believe that no capital gains treatment on startups would be a very impactful thing, as well as some tax credits to make hiring employees more cost effective. But I think that's outside the scope of this particular discussion, but would be a big +1 on that. One of my observations started, for those who are unaware, I started the New Jersey Tech Meetup, which is the largest community of entrepreneurs, and obviously now with Tech United also bring together another large community of startups, investors, entrepreneurs in the entire ecosystem. And one observation is that there are a variety of activities that exist around the state, excuse me, and that the EDA has, in its current structure, limited ability to provide financial support to many of these organizations. Obviously, I'm talking about Tech United, but I'm also thinking about meetups, other trade groups, including groups like Tom's and others. And to be clear, he hasn't asked me, or nor has anyone else, to add this comment. But I think it's important that there's consideration in thinking about these strategic commitments, that those bidding are encouraged to support and engage with what already exists versus start something new, which I think has a significant risk of diluting what the efforts of many of us around the state. So we'll be submitting more formal feedback, but I want to be clear on encouraging those who bid to support mentorship programs that exist, accelerators and workspaces that exist to help them grow versus potentially starting a competing space, accelerators that exist, large events that already exist. So obviously we host some, but I think there are many organizations that would benefit and could then benefit from a mechanism that the EDA can have access to provide funding for those of us who are already doing quite a bit of this work.
Yeah, that's great, Erin. Thank you very much. Good morning. Yeah, that's spot on, actually. We're not going to get into the weeds on the scoring mechanism this morning, but you will see in the deck online, one of the exhibits actually kind of gives a model scoring framework, and collaboration and participation in the ecosystem are absolutely things that are kind of high on the list for us. Sometimes it's no need to recreate the wheel, but kind of figure out a new way to make the wheel roll, I guess. So absolutely hear that, and that'll definitely be a consideration we'll put into this.
To add a piece of clarity, if you don't mind some feedback on that, the way this presentation reads, I'm assuming there are several partners, some of our corporate partners on the line, and when we speak to them about supporting us to increase their chances for a bid or supporting others, I mean, obviously I'm talking about Tech United in this moment, but I would love to see other grassroots meetups, other trade groups supported in these efforts. The way this current presentation reads doesn't seem to signal that, and so I appreciate you're not going to share the scoring mechanism, but having clarity on the importance of supporting what exists versus starting what new. I read a variety of the comment or the presentation today as starting new versus supporting existing. So for what it's worth, making sure it's clear to those who are bidding that that's a valuable consideration would be appreciated. But yeah,
that's also helpful. Our goal is to be as transparent and put as much information out so people can make an informed bid. We don't want people going blind into this, so that will be, the scoring mechanism, all that stuff will be made as transparent as we possibly can. But I absolutely hear you. Thank you.
Great. Excited about the program. Very much so.
Thanks, Erin. Thanks for your comments. Next, we have Mark Zimmerman. Mark, I've unmuted you on our end. If you would introduce yourself and let us know where you're calling from.
Sure. My name is Mark Zimmerman. I work at Commercial Metals. We have a steel mill in Sayreville, New Jersey, so we're an existing customer. to give you some clarity, we're the biggest recycler in the state of New Jersey. We did over 750 million pounds of recycling of steel last year. And so, I mean, we're glad you've put this up. I think it's going to help maintain good jobs in the state. But the one question I have you compared this to other programs in the local areas, like what other states or utilities offer when you put this together?
Yeah, absolutely. Good morning, Mark. Thank you. Yeah, and that was early stages of this program, was really going out and understanding what are other states doing. As Kathleen mentioned, I think early on, you know, there are specific states that we want to compete with. There are specific states that we think we've got an advantage to. So we wanted to understand who else is doing something like this in the ecosystem, right? What we have here is sort of a novel mechanism made with some kind of familiar pieces, right? Tax credit auctions exist in other states, investment programs exist in other states and the state. This is really the establishment of all of these pieces on one platform. So we think we do have an advantage here. I don't know, Kathleen, if you wanted to add anything else.
Yeah, Tim, maybe mention some of the states that you benchmarked against that are doing corporate tax auctions. I think that will help Mark understand kind of what we looked at, because we really tried to understand those states that had it kind of, they were very, very gracious with sharing feedback and time and thoughts around what went well on their tax credit auction bids and, you know, areas they would recommend we look at enhancing.
Yeah, just, you know, locally, we spoke with folks from Pennsylvania, representatives from and consultants for Pennsylvania, for Maryland, a little further south down in North Carolina. We reached out to folks actually in Oregon who had a really interesting, successful program. So we got some good local feedback, but again, we reached out across the country to understand what we, you know, who had done it before and could we do the same or better.
Yeah, thank you for that. Am I still on or no?
You're still on.
Okay, I'm sorry. Yeah. So yeah, just one of the questions. So we do steel, so you can ship, you know, we ship steel from Tennessee, you know, from here out to Chicago and potentially into Colorado. So there's, I guess one of the questions I have, did you look at what any of the utilities specifically offer for new loads? And the thing that comes to my mind is what TVA offers in their footprint. So that would include, like, you know, Tennessee into eastern, or I'm sorry, into western Virginia.
I think we did look at one at Tennessee as well for this, but I would be remiss to offer any specific input in my recollections, but we can get some information back.
Yeah, no. I understand. My concern, like this, you're just looking at what the states are offering, I guess, is just to be clear, it's not what the, like, a utility program would offer.
That's correct. Yeah, that's correct.
Okay, cool. All right, thank you.
Yeah, and Mark, I would just mention, and happy to have the team follow up with you directly offline, is part of our work around the Green Fund. We currently have an open RFI, request for information, around financing products in clean energy. And some of that has to do with work with the utilities. And so that might be a good parallel to what you're talking about, but we'll certainly have some of our clean energy team follow up with you separately on that, because that's the team that really works with the utility financing. Relative to benchmarking here, as Tim mentioned, we really looked at state tax credit auctions for this piece of the equation.
Okay, thank you all.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mark. Next, we have Manoj Govindan, and if I mispronounce that, I apologize. You should be able to unmute yourself and join the conversation.
Patience, thank you. No, that you did very well with the name. Thank you. I appreciate that. Good morning, everyone. Manoj Govindan. I'm with Prudential, so Newark, New Jersey. Very excited about this program. I have some history. I heard you had engaged with North Carolina. So in past instances, I've lived and engaged with the North Carolina EDA efforts, specifically around startups and in Charlotte, as also with Georgia and Atlanta, and to a smaller extent with New York and New York City. But so I have a question and a comment, and I'm just going to state them. They're relatively generic. nothing specific to Prudential specifically. Given just my experience in these efforts around startups, my question is, while you have programs that are specific to each pillar, there are three pillars that make these efforts kind of successful, right? One is strategic capital, which is money. Two is entrepreneurs and their ideas, which is intellectual capital. And then the third is obviously talent, which is human capital. Invariably, there are programs that are kind of designed within each of these three pillars. But what I have missed often is programmatics that create the interdependencies between them and the feedback loop between them. Anything in your design here that you are thinking about, how do you interact between these three pillars? So there's venture capital activity and strategic capital activity, but there is activity to engage with universities and schools and with corporations. But what is happening between the three of them is one question I have. And I have a second question or comment as well, but I don't know if you wanted me to go on record or stop and wait for your response first.
Why don't we address your first question, comment? Tim, if okay with you, I'll jump in and feel free to supplement. So I think you are spot on the need to connect the pieces. And that's truly what we believe is the unique value proposition here. So that advisory role we think is really important so that we have an active and engaged bidder, and the curation that's going to happen. So you saw events on one of the slides is going to be important. So we will have a series of curated events to bring physically, strategically, and so on, to bring all of those pieces together. Some of them might be vertical focused, some of them might be focused by specific topics. But what we heard very, very early on when the governor introduced the concept of the Evergreen Fund is from primarily actually investors, was the need for that connectivity. And so we totally agree with you, and we believe that's the secret sauce that's going to pull all of this together, and something that we're really looking forward to the strategic partners helping us determine the path forward on that.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you. I agreed. I appreciate that. I'll quickly make the comment on the second one and then cede my time back. But the other thing, in past experiences, I noticed is the effort needed to get corporations, in particular large companies, right, off of their philanthropic and corporate social responsibility mindset and more into a business mindset, right? How do we go into this from a business point of view, not just check the box in terms of a CSR? And so one effort that has been successful in this is really highlighting the examples. And you had great examples on the top there, Audible and Jet and Celine, I believe, using those acquisitions as case studies to show the industry why stepping in from a business point of view rather than from a philanthropic point of view makes sense, and what would be the path they take to get there I think would be very, very, very important for us to call out in the program early, so that corporations or industry leaders are kind of committed to that path rather than a CSR path.
That's great.
Yeah, and I would say everyone has a different motivation, right? But your guidance on what levers to push as we talk to the corporate bidders is very helpful. So thank you.
That's perfect. Thank you.
Thanks so much. I don't see any other raised hands right now, so I'd like to encourage folks to raise your hand. I'm gonna, and that happened quickly. I've got Tom Sullivan. Tom, you should be able to unmute yourself and speak now. Please introduce yourself and let us know where you're calling from.
Thank you, Patience. Tom Sullivan. I'm CEO of Princeton Partners. It is an innovation and brand marketing company. Been involved in startups to large corporations, but for 25 years in New Jersey. I was really, first of all, thank you, EDA, for the strategy. I'm glad to see it come to life. The a strategic question and a tactical question. I'll start with the tactical because I'm not going to be there this afternoon. But I'm thinking about it from the Tech Venture Fund, Tech Council Ventures. If Jim Gunton has provided input, I'm sure he has. But I'm wondering why, if I understand it correctly, that from the qualified VC management investments, there's a 2-deal limit per year, if I understand it. I know there's a $5 million cap, but has there been consideration to flexibility for the VC managers? I mean, Greg Olson mentioned before if he made $1 million investment. It seems to me that it would be awesome if some of the VCs who are focused particularly in some verticals like health tech, ed tech, and fintech, that they would have the flexibility on the number of deals because they could bring syndicate to that and so forth. So I don't know what the limitations are or the level of flexibility, but have you considered that? Do I understand it correctly? And is there more flexibility on what the VC manager can do?
Yeah, that's a good question. Good morning, Tom. Thank you. So that is a legislative point. The 2-deal maximum is given to us in the law. So we won't have the flexibility to address that in the regulations, but your point is absolutely well taken. Part of the program is to encourage more VCs, whether they're local or national, to look at New Jersey. We want to qualify, as many eligible folks as we can, actually. So if it may be the case that while one VC has hit their maximum, look, if it's a great qualified VC and they're partnering with another VC who might not be based in New Jersey, maybe they're a West Coaster, maybe that venture capital firm would like to become qualified, we can bring them into the pool. And even though it's a syndicated deal, that new firm will have kind of a bite at the apple, a first bite at the apple, so to speak, actually. So there are cases in syndication where, new folks can come in to bring us a new deal, for example. Okay.
Good. Can I just ask if there's an opportunity for a strategic question?
Sure. Yeah. I don't know, Kathleen, actually, do you have any?
If I could just add, I think if I was trying to read a legislator's mind, which is a scary thing, I would think there was a concern about concentration risk, Tom. And, we have a handful of active firms in the state. Our goal and our hope is that they will become partners with us in this. But, you could see if there was no transactional cap per year, and again, it's $5 million initial investment. And as we'll talk about this afternoon, the way it's structured is that initial investment also has a participation in follow-on from the Evergreen Fund. And 2 deals is a pretty active VC in New Jersey a year, even for the firms that we see that are located here. So I'm assuming, which, is never a good thing to do, but I'm assuming that it was with the intent of limiting concentration risk.
Thank you. And I'm very excited about the New Brunswick Innovation Hub. And you mentioned quite a few industries that were likely eligible for investment. And I was wondering if there was a strategy around prioritizing some of those so that we can have a cluster of innovation that expands. I mean, we obviously are great in life sciences and other areas, but I think specifically of Newark, New Jersey with fintech and ed tech. Have you given consideration to that? I know there's a portion of the funding available on a dedicated basis to minority-owned firms. Have you given consideration to other cities in New Jersey like Newark or Camden?
Yeah, great question. Tim, do you want to discuss the opportunity zone piece of the legislation?
Yeah, and there might be a bigger question in there, Tom, but to answer the latter point specifically, there will be consideration for managers that have an office or a focus for incentive areas in the state. And specific to opportunity zones, for example, there's an additional overage. For example, the maximum investment that a company may receive from the program is $5 million. But if a company is located in an opportunity zone, for example, that maximum can go up to $6.25 million, actually. So I think that speaks directly to the latter question. I don't know, Kathleen, do you have any other input?
Yeah, and certainly what I hear from you, Tom, is the need to recognize the unique attributes of the various physical cities that we have in New Jersey. Although we notice the hub as kind of the primary anchor location, I would imagine, as we do with most things in the state, is that it would rotate around. So, you know, Newark is extremely robust these days, particularly with the news of hacks locating there. And with partners like Newark Venture Partners there and NJIT. So I would imagine as this rolls out, the road show or the community engagement events would go to different locations. And, you know, certainly we've got a lot of work to do in Camden. There's a lot of accessibility to our partners in Philadelphia, and we want to bring them across the river to do more as well. So I think that's a very valid point and something that we'll work on as we roll out the program.
Great, thank you.
Thanks, Tom. So now Erin Price is back to join us again. Erin, you should be able to unmute yourself and provide some further comment.
Thanks, Patience. I appreciate it. As you know, I tend to have lots of comments, so thanks for letting me back on. I would be a +1 on Tom's point, even though I recognize it's a legislative issue on the cap for funds. I think it's in line with my other comment that it seems like it's not rewarding those who've been investing in the state for many years. In fact, inviting in competition, which is an unfortunate byproduct of that legislation. But regardless, I appreciate the position you're in there. I was wondering about the timing of this. When do you believe this? Maybe I missed a slide here, but when do you believe this will launch?
Aaron, so just a clarification. So again, we'll speak to the investment portion later on this afternoon, and you'll see a little bit more specifically our thinking to evaluate managers. The intention is actually to consider how much investment activity a manager has, prior activity a manager has in the state of New Jersey, if they're based here, things like that. So we'll talk about that later if you're available.
And Tim, I believe there's kind of a fast track for managers that we already work with in the state, right?
Great point. We have a great roster of partners, including the Tech Council Ventures, Newark Venture Partners, Edison Partners, just to name a few within our boundaries. And we're working through the opportunity to, as Kathleen said, fast track those managers actually.
I think the bigger issue, Tim, and I'd love to hear the point on timing though, is the cap on 2 deals and maybe the $5 million mark. But regardless, that's good to hear.
So yeah, sorry, go ahead, Kath.
Timing.
We are still, obviously we're building this out right now. We are working expeditiously, efficiently to make sure we get all of the pieces right. And as you heard, one of the feedback questions that we are seeking from the corporations that might consider into the when the tax auction happens is there a period in the year which might be more relevant for the tax auction to happen? Are corporations thinking more about their tax liability at the end of the year, where we might get greater engagement to maximize the outcome of the auction, for example? So a little bit of this, or a lot of that'll feedback from the comments today.
Great, thank you.
Yeah, thanks.
Thanks. Next, we have Jeff Pierce. Jeff, you should be able to unmute yourself, mute yourself, provide your comment. Please introduce yourself and let us know where you're calling from.
Thanks, Patience. Yes, my name's Jeff Pierce. I'm an early stage co-founder of a New Jersey company called VoteLight. My comment probably echoes a little bit what Erin and I think Tom were talking about, which is if you limit it to, and I understand legislatively, it's to 2 investments a year. Mm-hmm. My only concern is how you would really address pre-seed type investments, which is where a lot of the innovation occurs, because you're not going to do $2.5 million in one investment for pre-seed. Mm-hmm. So I think I would encourage you to think about how to get some of the more early stage investors to consider, applying for, they're going to do maybe 100,000 average per investment, maybe a couple 100,000. This program doesn't seem to attract the investors, I guess, who are doing the earliest stages. Is kind of my comment.
Thanks, Jeff. Appreciate the comment. We'll talk again more on the investment piece later on this afternoon. I might need to clarify. So it's going to be a limit of 2 investments per manager per year. So we're hoping that X number of managers come in and want to do multiple deals per year. As Kathleen, I think, did allude to earlier, we make the distinction between an initial investment and a follow-on investment, right? So a typical venture firm will make an investment of X dollars initially, and they're reserved for follow-on. So that follow-on does not count against that initial investment piece, actually. And
Tim,
again,
if I can jump in here too, a couple things I would add. You know, the legislation talks about growth stage of a company as well. So those are things that we are required to execute around. But we have a few other tools in our toolbox, focus on early stage, and one is the Angel Investor Tax Credit Program, which was recently increased from a 10% to a 20% tax credit with a 5% bonus for investing in a minority or woman-owned business. So we're incentivizing those investors to invest in businesses, and we're actually in the early stages of reviewing a similar product for angel deals. So stay tuned on that, but hear you certainly on that piece.
Thank you.
Guys, we'll wish you all a wonderful rest of your morning and hope to see some of you again this afternoon. Thanks very much for joining us. We appreciate it.